As some of you may have seen from your notification, on Saturday in 2 days' time, I am giving another online concert for my college. This time it will be dedicated to Bach. So I thought it might be appropriate to do a video to talk a little bit more in detail about how I personally conceive Bach, how I approach playing it at the piano. And perhaps I'll explain a little bit. I intend to focus this talk, which is totally unprepared, on the Fantasy and Fugue in A minor, because it covers probably quite a few points that I'd like to address. So the first thing is that I am a pianist and I like Bach on the piano. I've always played it on the piano. And I'd like to defend or justify this approach. I regard playing Bach at the piano as a transcription. Not very different in effect as playing Bach on the xylophone or on the guitar or something like that. It is of course something Bach would never have heard himself, and we therefore cannot know whether he would have liked the idea or not. But I do like it, and it's enough for me. If I regard the interpretation in the piano as a transcription, it opens a few doors for me. There are things I can do. I can either play the music using the best of what my instrument has to offer to create new possibility of interpretation, and I can also try to imitate either the harpsichord, but also the organ, or even the clavichord, or even an orchestra. I can imitate a cello line or oboe on the right hand. The sound world I imagine is entirely my own. So I am not certainly trying to be a harpsichordist at the piano. And I am going to use the full resources of my instrument, pedal included. It always seemed to me a heresy to try to play Bach on the piano without using the pedal, because the harpsichord doesn't have the pedal. Because the harpsichord has a completely different sound which doesn't need the pedal. But in fact, if I was to try to recreate the sound of the harpsichord at the piano, I would use actually a great deal of pedal, because the harpsichord has a natural resonance for every single tone that the piano absolutely doesn't have. So if I was, for example, going to play, departing from what I said originally, this very odd work which is called Prelude Fantasy, which is very much a notated improvisation, that's a place where, if anything, the sound I would like to get from the very beginning is the sound of the harpsichord. Now, it would be absurd to play it without pedal, because it would sound absolutely not. It's a bad use of the piano, and it certainly doesn't come anywhere near imitating the sound of the harpsichord, which has so much more brilliance. If I wanted to come anywhere close, I would need to have a lot of finger articulation and, frankly, a good deal of pedal to recreate this ebullience that the harpsichord can do at its best. In some ways, I am closer this way. So that's to talk about this complicated problem of the use of the pedal in Bach. And we will probably be discussing it a bit more. Now, I don't know, some of you may be familiar with this Fantasy and Fugue in A minor, which is a rather splendid work, quite neglected. Very few pianists actually play it. It is written like this. and so on. Now, this is fine as it is. If I was trying to imitate the harpsichord, I would probably do a lot more spreading, again liberal use of the pedal, and probably quite a few ornaments. I would probably do something like that. And quite a lot of rubato to compensate also for the lack of differentiation in the tone. Now that personally doesn't inspire me in that beginning. What I hear is rather the sound of a full organ, an organ in absolute full blast. And that leads me into quite a different path, which might even be controversial. And then I change the stop and I get this very pure sound. So I am thinking really, I wouldn't say orchestrally, I would say organistically about this piece. And it is written on two styles, so we assume that it was written for probably a harpsichord. But it is true that the sound world would accommodate itself very well from the organ. When we pass this first grandiose section and we get to this transition, I'm also here trying to replicate again not the harpsichord, which would have a more moving, flowing, and again but again the universe of a very quiet registration in the organ. Now, to replicate the organ, the biggest challenge is to deal with the natural decay of the sound of the piano. And it is one of the major issues of playing Bach, and it's actually the place where the piano can bring something to the table that the harpsichord cannot. Although our sounds do not have the sustaining power, the infinite sustaining power of the organ, they have a greater sustaining power than the harpsichord, and we can use this to our advantage. The trick, and it is a bit of an art and it needs to be learned, is that really the longer the note, the louder one should make it sound, and therefore calibrate all the short notes so that they lead naturally to those longer notes which will have precedence. So if I play without paying much attention to this, then it will sound something like that. But if I try to be more expressive on the long note, stop. Back again to, so I try to alternate between those episodes of full volume, and then now I must say that this conception is not something I have invented. There is a tradition. I know two people who think of it this way. One is Edwin Fischer, who has been the biggest influence on my way of playing Bach. The other is Samuel Feinberg, who in some ways is a kind of Russian Fischer. The ideas are surprisingly close in many ways, although the tradition of playing is very different, and it does have implications. Fischer does another very nice thing that I have stolen, I have to say. There is one last moment where this big opening comes again. If I take a... Now here. So here we are back to the beginning, the idea of the beginning. So Feinberg naturally is led to do something like that. I don't know exactly how he lays out the arrangement, but something like that. Fischer, to my mind, is more poetic here, and he just adds a stop which puts an extra octave at the top, and it gets a fairly magical effect, although you can't sustain it for very long because the writing is too intricate. But just to give a flavor of that color is nice enough, and I have taken that from here. To the norm. So that is how I conceive this fantasy, which is, again, I have to say, it's a magnificent work that is rarely played. The pianist Brendel plays it because he studied with Fischer, and I know Sokolov does play it in a much more straightforward way. But apart from that, I haven't heard it many times on the piano.